Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. That seems a little too bright. How about that's much better. Much better. Let's start with Bill Gates today, who has gone from being, annoying to being intolerably fiendish. I heard about this story, a few months ago, and I thought, well, it must be another example of misinformation or disinformation or something like that. But how can we tell anymore? But this appears to be legit. From the Daily Mail, Ryan Morrison, could dimming the sun help cool the earth? Bill Gates wants to spray millions of tons of chalk into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight and slow global warming, but critics fear it could be disastrous. Oh, I see. We've gone from a war against mankind's eternal enemy, carbon, to a war against mankind's even greater enemy, the sun, which of course happens to be the source of all life on Earth. But Bill Gates is not one to back away from a fight, even from something which is 93 million miles away. The first test of a project back to spray millions of tons of chalk into the stratosphere in an attempt to dim the sun and cool the earth could happen in June. Harvard University experts will test the system by sending a large balloon 12 miles above the Swedish town of Kiruna and have it drop 2 kilograms of chalk dust into the stratosphere. The aim of the estimated $3 million mission, backed by billionaire Bill Gates, is to have the chalk deflect a portion of the sun's radiation, stop it from hitting the surface, and cool the planet. The idea has been heavily criticized since its inception, with project director Frank Koich even calling the need for this scale of geoengineering terrifying. And experts have warned that the unusual technique could be disastrous for weather systems in ways nobody can predict. Backed by a range of private donors, including Gates, the test mission is launching from Sweden, as they could offer a launch by the end of this summer. You know, I'm reminded that the first nuclear chain reaction in history was performed in Soldier Field in Chicago, because they've done all the math. Nothing to worry about there. They couldn't have gone into a cornfield or something. No. Soldier Field, Chicago. The test balloon will lift 600 kilograms of scientific equipment 12 miles above the surface of the Arctic town, and if all goes well, about 2 kilograms of dust will be released. This will then create a dust plume several kilometers in length, not large enough to have any effect on the intensity of the sun's rays hitting the Earth. During that first test, the team would gather information on how particles of dust react with the air. This could then be fed into computer models, oh dear, to determine what would happen if it were ever carried out at scale. Koich told the Times he wants to determine the true effects, as current models may be too optimistic and make the technique look attractive. It would take tons of dust and plumes many hundreds of kilometers long to make a difference. The theory being that the dust would create a massive sunshade. Yes, that's exactly what Canada needs to become even colder. This would reflect some of the sun's rays and heat back to space, dimming those that get through, and so protecting the Earth from the ravages of climate warming. Koich, whose Harvard lab is leading the project, says the strategy would only be deployed in desperation to stop parts of the planet becoming uninhabitable. In desperation. The world's been locked down for a year now, including Vancouver Island, where I live, where last time I checked, there had been 11 deaths in a population of 800,000. Where was the desperation that led to the smothering of society and the smashing of the economy? If scientists or bureaucrats or so-called experts have the opportunity to do something, they will do it. without any efforts to stop climate change, such as curbs on greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels and other pollutants, parts of the world would be up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than they are today. Studies show. Yes, faked data and bogus models. Oh, this would leave parts of the planet uninhabitable by humans, including areas of Australia where maximum temperatures already top 123 degrees Fahrenheit. However, critics of the dust cloud concept say it gives politicians an excuse not to take the difficult action required to properly tackle climate change. Oh, I see. So the problem with this fiendish scheme is not because it's, fiendish, and the consequences could be who knows, but that apparently not enough carbon is being dealt with. It would cool the planet, said University of Edinburgh professor Stuart Hazeldine. Okay, but do nothing to remove the main cause of global warming. Yes, it's like taking heroin, he said. You've got to carry on doing the drug to keep on having the effect. Oh, do we believe that heroin is a bad thing now? So it's like taking heroin. How? Who's the heroin addict? Who's the pusher here? Sir David King from the University of Cambridge told The Times there should be a moratorium on rolling the technique out. He said it could be disastrous for weather systems in ways nobody can predict, so data should be gathered through modeling and other techniques. Coit says that's exactly what they're doing with this test. Yeah. So there's supposedly a whole number of horrific conspiracy theories about Bill Gates out there. And they're all either misinformation or disinformation or both. Now that I learned that Bill Gates intends to block the sun's rays with dust, I'm kind of thinking you could tell me anything about Bill Gates and I'd believe it. Oh, yes, there's a sidebar here in this story from the Daily Mail where it talks about the explosion of the volcano Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. I'm reminded that when Krakatoa exploded, so much dust was released into the atmosphere that it resulted in what is called a year without summer. Maybe that's what Bill Gates is looking for. I don't know, summer is just too enjoyable. I don't think that we really deserve summer anymore, given how wicked, racist, misogynist, homophobic, transphobic, white supremacist we are. No. I think that summer needs to be abolished. No half measures there. Bill Gates' chalk dust plan to save the world. This is from Vicky Allen in the Glasgow Herald. Chalk dust, an issue in these days of online whiteboards? This is dystopian sci-fi, not reality. No, it's real. Wouldn't it be better just to cut our emissions? Why are we even considering it? Good question. Good question. But let's go to Snopes here. And as far as I can see, Snopes exists, to spread disinformation. Here is their story on this from January the 5th. Is Bill Gates funding efforts to block the sun? Sensationalist headlines mischaracterize the efforts of Harvard's Scopex project. This is by Alex Kasprak. It's rated mostly false. Since 2007, Bill Gates has funded research initiatives that, in part, provide grants for experiments related to solar radiation management, a form of geoengineering controversially proposed as a last-ditch solution to anthropogenic global warming. What's false? The project at issue in several sensationalized news stories, Scopex, is an experiment designed to collect data. The most the experiment would seek to do would be to release 2 kilograms, 4.4 pounds of non-toxic dust from a weather balloon 12 miles in the sky. Bill Gates is a popular target of conspiracy theories, characterizing his charitable giving as evidence of a nefarious world domination scheme. Yes, apparently this story has not been properly contextualized. No, this isn't the story of a monstrous man attempting seriously to dim the power of the sun. No, it's just about collecting data. Here's a story from Armstrong Economics from last year called Did Bill Gates Buy the Centers for Disease Control? Dr. Anthony Fauci has a $100 million conflict of interest, which is why he was opposing Trump. He was in league with Bill Gates, who has pledged $100 million for Fauci to play with. The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases director, Dr. Fauci, who was against using chloroquine, said in an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper, "There is no magic drug for coronavirus right now. Let me put it into perspective for the viewers. I have warned," writes Armstrong, "that the CDC takes private money through its foundation. Gates even gave CDC Foundation $13.5 million. I do not believe we can trust Fauci in the least. The CDC nor the NIH should never be allowed to be bought in this way." Well, yeah, I guess good money is where you find it. And it's not as if Bill Gates could possibly have any agenda, any hidden agenda. He is simply the kindest, warmest, gentlest man who has ever lived. I mean, it's that simple. You can't be against Bill Gates and still be a good person, although I bought Windows Vista when it came out. And what resulted? It led to days and weeks of murderous thoughts, but I got over it. Hello to Palcasso88 and Dan. Palcasso88 says Bill Gates is certifiable. Chogokin666 says, "What's this nerd's problem?" Dan says we could always send Bill Gates into the sun. Brandon Smith says, "Send Bill extortion money or it's Ice Age time." How per Viper at the gates of doom. Quachilango says, "I prefer another Krakatoa." Rainy day in Victoria. Yes, that is the sound that you hear, which is the rain pelting against the side of the building. You know, it rains here a lot, not as much as Vancouver, but a lot. And I think this may be the first show I've done in this hotel where it's actually raining enough during the show so that you can hear that noise. Brennan Smith says, "Strong enough for a man, pH balanced for a maniac." Justin Proto says, "Enough is enough. We need to take a stand and just blow up the sun." Again, from Brandon Smith, "Nothing like rushing in headlong to generate the largest catastrophe possible." Brandon Smith again, "The sun emits white light. Cancel it and install a black hole sun in its place." Enron says, "I like cooler than average summers and warmer than average winters. Hot and humid is not fun." No, it's not. Actually, I mean, I can't bear it myself. I spent summers in Montreal, Toronto, New York, and London. And yes, I wasn't born for that. Or I wasn't acclimated to it. Hello to G's Heestall and to Professor Pohl. HI positive transgender says, "I love the rain." Yeah, I suppose so. If it rained every single day, I'd be fine with it. I would not, actually. I'm only happy when it rains. Yeah. That's a song by Garbage. Quite good one. Of course, I'm also reminded of Jesus and Mary Chain. What was it? 9 million rainy days. But yeah, Bill Gates. I preferred Bill Gates when he just wanted to be dictator of the software world. White supremacy. Let's talk about white supremacy. Everyone's talking about white supremacy. It's an absurd notion. I mean, if white supremacy actually existed, then there would not be a cottage industry, or more than a cottage industry. We wouldn't have whole governments, as well as the media, the academy, business, taken over by people who tell us on a regular basis that white people are evil, akin to witches, in fact. And that, as Coca-Cola put it, we need to be less white. Here's a story from Michelle Malkin at VDARE. Screw up, move up is a standard operating procedure in corporate and government bureaucracies, but in American journalism, the system goes far beyond rewarding incompetence. It sanctifies bias. It promotes dishonesty and incentivizes malice. Want to get ahead in the liberal media? Just follow this credo: spew lies, climb high. Take the case of professional character assassin Talia Lavin. This week, she published a high-profile feature at msnbc.com as an official MSNBC opinion columnist. The hit piece targets a new upstart group of young college conservatives who have broken away from the establishment College Republican National Committee. The students believe that many college Republican chapters have veered far left on social issues, foreign policy, and immigration. The split mirrors the widening schism between populists and elites in the DC GOP. Malkin continues, I know many of the leaders of the new College Republicans United organization personally and spoke to the Arizona State University CRU chapter last year. They are energetic patriots who embrace America first and mean it. To Lavin, this is tantamount to white supremacy and Nazi sympathies. Those are literal quotations, white supremacy and Nazi sympathies. Yes, college students are falling in love with white supremacy. For proof that the kids are white supremacists, their endorsement from me, Michelle Malkin reports. Yes, really. Lavin reports, operating under the innocuous-sounding name College Republicans United, the group claims endorsements by fringe white nationalist figures like Michelle Malkin. There she goes. Well, I am indeed an unapologetic nationalist, but I am brown. Labeling everything and everyone she dislikes white supremacy and Nazis is Lavin's entire shtick. In 2018, she falsely accused Justin Gartner, a combat-wounded war veteran and computer forensic analyst for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, of sporting a Nazi tattoo she claimed was an Iron Cross. It was actually a Maltese cross, the symbol of double amputee Gartner's platoon in Afghanistan, Titan II. He lost both legs during an IED clearing mission and earned the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Combat Valor and the Purple Heart before joining ICE to combat online child exploitation. The Harvard-educated Lavin was forced to issue a faux apology after losing her job as a fact-checker for the once esteemed New Yorker magazine, but she didn't retract a single bilious word of a diatribe she penned titled, "No, we don't have to be friends with Trump supporters," which endorsed hatred and violence against Nazis and ICE agents. In it, she brazenly proclaimed, when they go low, stomp them on the head. Again, that is a direct quotation, when they go low, stomp them on the head. Now, I remember this story, the controversy about it. The planted axiom in these stories is that the Iron Cross is a Nazi symbol, and the Iron Cross is not a Nazi symbol. Actually, the eagle motif or double eagle is not a Nazi symbol either. But we have been gaslighted by the media to believe that both double eagle and the Iron Cross are indeed Nazi symbols when they are not. Malkin continues, Lavin then snagged a job as a lecturer for a New York University undergraduate journalism class, which was canceled for lack of interest, before serving as an extremism researcher for the George Soros-funded disinformation operation Media Matters for America in 2019. She secured a deal with Hachette Books that resulted in a 2020 book on white supremacy. What else? Recently published a feature op-ed in the Boston Globe on white supremacy. What else? And was quoted earlier this month in the foreword to bolster the hysterical conspiracy theory that the Conservative Political Action Conference stage was deliberately shaped in the form of a Nazi runic symbol. In 2019, Lavin lied on Twitter about being chased from a free speech conference in Philadelphia. The problem, as reporters from the Post-Millennial pointed out, is that the conference venue was the highly secure and intensely surveilled Sugar House Casino. In 2020, Lavin disseminated a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette photo of an anti-COVID lockdown activist holding a sign that read, work sets you free, which is an English translation of the German slogan Arbeit macht frei, which appears over the entrance of the Auschwitz concentration camp. Lavin juxtaposed the two images with her caption, "This is intentional." Smearing Reopen America protesters as Nazis might have worked if not for indie journalist Andy Ngo's eagle eye. He discovered that the photo had been doctored and that the sign actually read, "Free Small Business." Instead of owning up to the deception, Lavin deleted the tweet and has spent the past year attacking Ngo as a, pardon the profanity, fascist grifter. Yes. Is there any doubt that the media hates us? That it wants us gone? It wants us removed? Oh, wait, has Twitter got rid of that tweet from The Root, which talked about white people being an epidemic, white people being a disease? This is what academics call eliminationist language. We hear a lot of eliminationist language regarding white people, which is curious, given that our societies are supposedly dominated through and through systemically, as they like to say, by white supremacism. And if you really want to, if you want to take a short trip to Crazy Town, just check out Talia Lavin's Twitter feed, where there is a lot. Portland police used force 6,000 times on protesters in 2020. Oh my God. And all they were trying to do is burn down the courthouse every single night. There's a lot of moaning about media layoffs. And yes, one can't help but feel schadenfreude. Here's one from an hour ago. This industry just breaks your heart over and over and over and over. Yes, 4 overs. I saw something today about donuts. Apparently there's a controversy about COVID-19 and donuts, that you should eat donuts because donuts, they release dopamine and they make you feel better. But apparently, yes, Jessie Gold, MD, Master of Science, describes herself as a psychiatrist, freelance writer, college and physician, mental health. Hate is not a mental illness. Mental health is health. GIF enthusiast. Work from home, school from home, job loss, canceled vacations, canceled graduations, canceled weddings, people who haven't slept, high rates of burnout, political division, among other things, for over a year. They just don't. Bring on the dopamine. Have a donut. She continues. This is Dr. Jessie Gold, MD, MS. So donuts give you dopamine, and dopamine makes you happy. Happy people just don't deserve to be judged for eating a donut in a time when we have systemic racism, massive grief, widespread trauma, 2 mass shootings, a global pandemic, rising rates of depression and anxiety. I wonder where Dr. Jessie Gold stands on the whole lockdown question. I'm going to step out on a limb and say that she's in favor of it. Apparently, this disproportionately hurts women. Perhaps women should have thought of that before they became the head cheerleaders, and in many cases, the primary implementers of a policy which, as mentioned earlier, has smothered society and crushed the economy. Here's another one. I'm going to start a new campaign called "It's a Pandemic with an Existing and Worsening Mental Health Crisis, and people can have a donut if they damn well please." Who are the people who are telling Dr. Jessie Gold, MD, MS, that she cannot have a donut or as many donuts as she chooses? I will point out, however, that obesity is highly correlated to the deaths from COVID-19. And we've learned that apparently Americans have put on an enormous amount of weight over the last year, which clearly is counterproductive. But no, if Dr. Gold, she wants her donuts, who am I? Who am I to say no? Let's have another look at the chat. It's the ability of women to make, first of all, the personal was the political. Now apparently it's the sociological as well. The ability of women to take anything, including donuts, and make it political. Well, it's amusing, of course. It's also rather concerning. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, enough about rain. Gamian hates rain with a passion. HIV positive transgender says, according to leftists, unborn white children in the womb are white supremacists. Of course, Michelle Malkin is of Filipino origin, but I suppose she could be called white adjacent or performatively white because she has the wrong opinions for a brown woman. GC Style says, well, Coca-Cola's default color is red, rather fitting for them. Coca-Cola was, considered and is still considered by many to be the American drink. But of course, they would go on and attack their customers. More about rain, a popular subject today, apparently. From HIV positive transgender, I think that given I'm entirely of Irish extraction, I have a genetic predisposition to liking rain and gray skies. Halper says whatever trends on Twitter is manipulated now, right? I've seen many stories to this effect. And Halper adds, feels like the DNC has a special red phone at Twitter HQ. So are people's rights to, or particularly women's rights to eat donuts, is that trending on Twitter? I think that would be funny if it were. Urban Planner says 12 years ago, the experts wanted to dump iron ore in the world's oceans to control the climate. How many years ago was it that Prime Minister Gordon Brown of Great Britain said that we had, I believe, 5 years before the end? Was that 10 years ago? Was that 12 years ago? Longer? I think it's now, 15 years to Greta Thunberg's apocalyptic prediction. I think she's predicted the world is going to end in 2036 unless, the economy is smashed. The world economy is smashed, which would result in, a massive die-off of billions of people. You should bring that up next time you talk to a climate extinction fanatic. Say, how come you never mentioned the die-off? Are you don't care about people in Africa and Asia? Because that's where most of the dying is going to come from. Could you possibly be racially prejudiced? I don't know. Their heads might explode. Phlegmaticus says, brings to mind Samantha Bee, Blame Canada, accusing a young man undergoing chemo treatment of being a skinhead. Halper says, extremism Soros scholar, username available. The platform, that would be Twitter, and many others like it, are meant to engineer a consensus socially. Well, there have been rumors from the beginning, since Twitter was so associated with the Arab Spring, and that turned out really well, didn't it? That there has been a CIA interest in Twitter from the beginning. Bob Paxton says, I really don't need to go anywhere to check out Crazy Town. Hello to William Hicks. I don't know of anyone, says Bob Paxton, who eats currywurst that it has COVID. Steve says, don't eat donuts. People are too fat already, but they're so delicious. My mother thought I was paranoid, says GC Stahl, when I talked about this woke BS 5 years ago. The last 2 years has red-pilled her to this insanity. Tim Horton's loving this, says Bob Paxson. Tricky Who says, I've been avoiding the telly for years. It makes one nauseous just to be an earshot. Laugh tracks of ghouls. Okay. Female cops ruin donuts, says Bob Paxson. Have you discussed the border crisis, says Gerard Depardieu. I have a little bit. Yes, they're people. This is I was reading the Irish Independent today, and looking at the Twitter feed and clicking on some of the stories, and that used to be a serious newspaper. It doesn't seem to be serious anymore. But yeah, I'll have more on them later. Chogokin666 says the green avatar anti-Iran thing is the first thing I noticed. Twitter as regime change engine, and how silly people are. Yeah, there was a mass murder. Well, there have been 2 recent mass murders in the United States. You know, mass murders have been going on in the United States for a long time, but the media has this annoying habit of each time there is one, oh my God, there's one every day, or there's one every 12 hours, or one every hour, when it is not actually like that. I've been saying for years that I think we can expect more of this as people become progressively crazier and fuller of drugs, both legal and illegal. And they're suffocated by a feeling of powerlessness, or I don't know, an apprehension of the insane ways in which we live. James Fulford writes at VDare, another Muslim immigrant mass murder, which is predictably being used to attack the gun rights of regular Americans and not for an immigration moratorium. I've done 2 posts about Ahmed al-Aliwi al-Issa, the Muslim gunman in Boulder, Colorado, but this isn't about him. It's about the MSN, the treason lobby, and the left's lack of connection to reality. In killing 10 people because he hated whites, Donald Trump, and America, al-Issa was engaging in normal behavior for a disgruntled, disaffected Muslim in America, whether immigrant or homegrown. Al-Issa was, according to the New York Times, born in Syria in 1999. In using this to advance the cause of gun control for white Americans, black Americans can get guns illegally, the left is engaging in normal behavior for people who hate Americans and love aliens, according to the New York Times. President Biden said Tuesday that he was devastated by the killing of 10 people at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, and called on Congress not to wait another minute in enacting legislation to ban assault rifles and high-capacity ammunition magazines. Assault rifles. Yeah, that locution is manufacturing consent. Biden said this should not be a partisan issue. James Fulford comments, actually, of course, it's, at least in this and too many similar cases, an immigrant issue. And it has all happened before. In 1997, Empire State Building gunman Ali Hassan Abu Kamal, a Muslim immigrant from Gaza, shot 7 people for Muslim reasons. At the time, the New York Police Department ignored the Muslim motives, so we didn't find out until 10 years later. The NYPD couldn't announce the shooter's Muslim motive. The story below from 1997 is an unofficial leak, but they could try to restrict the rights of Floridians to buy guns. A rambling note found in Abu Kamal's pocket blamed the United States for using Israel as an instrument against Palestine. It also expressed anger at France and Britain and indicated that Abu Kamal planned to vent his anger at the Empire State Building. As Fulford noted, in 2001, first column after 9/11, when Ali Hassan Abu Kamal opened fire on the top deck of the Empire State Building, then Mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, who had made New York a sanctuary city, called for restrictions on the freedom of Americans. It never occurs to them to limit America's intake of people from murderous places like Jamaica and Syria. It turns out, by the way, that the FBI knew that this particular Muslim immigrant was a threat. This is what Mark Stein likes to call the known wolf, as opposed to the lone wolf narrative. The suspect's identity was previously known to the FBI, according to the New York Times, because he was linked to another individual under investigation by the Bureau, according to law enforcement officials. You know, every time there's some Muslim terrorist incident in France or Germany, it is revealed officially that this person was known to the security services. This suggests one of two things: that security services are useless, or that they have so many Muslims on their list that they don't have the resources to stop any of them. And Coulter said about Chattanooga gunman Muhammad Youssef Abdul Aziz, a Muslim from Kuwait who murdered 4 U.S. Marines, instead of paying the FBI to follow certain immigrants for years, how about not admitting them in the first place? And of course, Colorado, which is a strong gun rights state, is thinking of enacting new gun laws, which it did in 2013 after the Newtown massacre, and the backlash from that led to some anti-gun Colorado politicians being recalled. And of course, that's the question here. Here's a list from VDare.com's Immigrant Mass Murder FAQ of all the mass murders we've recorded committed by Muslim immigrants. And it is a long list going back to 1984. Well, that's 134 actual murders and about 1,300 wounded. 9/11 isn't on this list for various reasons. Briefly, the answer to mass shootings: be armed and fight back, and to apply capital punishment to surviving murderers. Oh, yes, and he finishes with the London Bridge attack in 2017, in which 3 Muslims in a white van plowed into a crowd and then started stabbing people. Peter Brimelow commented, after London, I'm reposting what I wrote after Manchester 2 weeks ago, which in turn reposted what I wrote after San Bernardino 2 years ago, which in turn reposted what I wrote after Virginia Tech 10 years ago. Nothing has changed, and the answer is still the same: an immigration moratorium and Muslim expulsion. See you here again after the next Muslim massacre, which on current form will be later this summer. Now, the fact that this shooter ended up being a Muslim who hated the United States, which had foolishly taken him in on humanitarian grounds, it's led to some embarrassment. Paul Joseph Watson writes on Summit News, leftists across Twitter, many of them journalists, scrambled to delete tweets after they falsely claimed the Boulder mass shooter, an Islamist from Syria who reportedly had ISIS sympathies, was white. Earlier today, the gunman was revealed as Ahmed al-Issa, a migrant from Syria who routinely complained about Donald Trump, racism, and Islamophobia on his Facebook page, which was swiftly deleted. Other reports also suggest that al-Issa had ISIS sympathies and had planned to return to Syria. However, innumerable journalists and other leftist commentators were embarrassed after prematurely claiming that the gunman was white in an effort to amplify their contrived moral panic about, wait for it, white supremacy. In America, if you're white, no matter how many people you kill, you'll be taken into custody alive, tweeted author John Pavlovitz. We really need to ban angry white guys with guns, he added before deleting both tweets. BLM activist Mina Harris, who was Kamala Harris's niece, also deleted a tweet that screeched, white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. Yeah. In her follow-up explanation, Harris says, I made an assumption based on his being taken into custody alive and the fact that the majority of mass shootings in the U.S. are carried out by white men. Yes, this is obviously an attempt to imply that whites are overrepresented in mass shootings, despite the fact that, according to Statista, quote, broadly speaking, the racial distribution of mass shootings mirrors the racial distribution of the U.S. population as a whole. Twitter itself also spread misinformation by featuring a trending panel which described the booster shooter as a white male. I've had this, every time there's one of these incidents, I have this sick feeling, and I'm sure many of you listening have had the same feeling. You hear a voice in your head that says, please, not a white man, not a white man, not a white man, not a white man. And of course, if it is a white man, then this is further proof that white people are the very devil. If it is not a white man, it's proof of nothing. It's proof of absolutely nothing. Funny how that works, eh? Another journalist who describes his role as debunking misinformation/fake news literally spread the same misinformation and fake news. After claiming that the shooter wasn't killed by cops because he was white, upon his identity being revealed, Amy Siskind subsequently demanded that people stop talking about it. Numerous other leftists claimed the shooter was white before his identity was made public. Dr. Ani Blackstock says people will continue to die just so that white men can own guns and reinforce the power they already have. Well, if rap music videos and hip hop tracks have taught me anything, it's that black people, well, black men at any rate, seem to really love guns. Glock is a brand that I've heard frequently. Francis Maxwell had tweeted, today a white man walked into a grocery store and killed 10 people. We have another posting L's Twitter feed. Check marks posting L's. Oh, and from the evergreen Tariq Nasheed. The fact that this dude gunned down 10 people and the police didn't shoot his ass, that means he's white. Okay, this is another meme which black people have willed into personal reality. Their truth, as they like to say, their lived experience. That black women live in a constant state of terror that white women are going to touch their hair. And that black men, and particularly black women, have to be 5, 10, 50 times smarter, harder working or whatever, just to hold a job that a mediocre white man holds because of, white supremacy. And now, apparently, all black mass shooters are killed by police and no white ones. I have not heard this just in the last few days. And others are even doubling down, claiming that Middle Eastern men called Ahmed are white. Well, the U.S. government used to classify them as white, so fairly recently, actually. And then they started complaining because if you were classified as not white, you get all of these goodies from the U.S. federal government. So in some cases, how is it possible that people who are not white get special privileges? That doesn't suggest white supremacy at all to me. It suggests, the opposite. This is from Leah Ustasevich at the New York Post. Representative Ilhan Omar is taking heat for tweeting about how narratives change based on a suspect's race or ethnicity in the wake of the Colorado massacre. The shooter's race or ethnicity seems front and center when they aren't white, Omar wrote Tuesday. Otherwise, it's just a mentally ill young man having a bad day. Oh, but I thought these Muslim shooters were all lone wolves. Now, Peter Hitchens frequently points out that a great many of these shooters, whether they're white or non-white, appear to be heavy marijuana users or are on antidepressants, and I do not doubt it. But I don't think that this really is all that significant in terms of immigration, because there's a certain type of person who is more likely to be radicalized. Particularly, what did we, after 9/11, we were told, these were phony Muslims, because they drank alcohol and they went to strip clubs. Yeah, all right. Imagine living in a country that you consider to be the great Satan, but you feel this irresistible pull to do things which you have been raised to believe are deeply wrong. Is it possible that a great many of these attacks are due to the shame and humiliation Muslim immigrants feel after they have been seduced by the great Satan? I very much think so. But we don't like to talk about the alienating effects of immigration. Immigration always comes with alienation. You are leaving your country, your homeland, your tribe, Heimat, as the Germans call it. How could this not be profoundly alienating? Barack Obama, he knows what's happening with all these shootings. In between taking his tens or hundreds of millions of dollars from Netflix, he took a moment off, to lecture Americans about their sins. This is from Stephen Nelson, at the New York Post. Former President Obama on Tuesday released a statement on the Boulder shooting, saying recent killings are being driven by disaffection, racism, and misogyny. I notice he didn't mention misogynoir. Why not? Why not brag? Obama linked mass shootings to discrimination in a message posted to Twitter calling for new gun control laws. And let's have a look at that. In so many ways, our lives may soon start to return to normal after a long, difficult year filled with so much loss. You notice the passiveness of that sentence? Like, what was responsible for this? But in a normal life, we should be able to buy groceries without fear. Who implanted that fear in us, Barack Obama? We should be able to go to school or go out with friends or worship together without mentally planning our escape. If someone shows up with a gun, we should be able to live our lives without wondering if the next trip outside our home could be our last. We should, but in America, we can't. It's long past time for those with the power to fight this epidemic of gun violence to do so, but it will take time to root out the disaffection, racism, and misogyny. Again, where's the misogynoir that fuse so many of these senseless acts of violence? But we can make it harder for those with hate in their hearts to buy weapons of war. We can overcome opposition by cowardly politicians and the pressure of a gun lobby that opposes any limit on the ability of anyone to assemble an arsenal. We can and we must. A once-in-a-century pandemic cannot be the only thing that slows mass shootings in this country. We shouldn't have to choose between one type of tragedy and the other. Oh, so this COVID-19 panic hysteria, it's a tragedy? Is it? Well, I guess it would be a self-inflicted tragedy then. I asked this question last week. 8 people killed in Atlanta in a massage parlor. 6 of them were Asian. This apparently was evidence of deadly anti-Asian prejudice. I asked a simple question: how many Asians work in massage parlors? I have no personal knowledge of this, but my anecdotal knowledge from reading stories about these places and about people being arrested at them is that there are an awful lot of Asian women working at massage parlors. And you think the media would be interested in that question? No, but of course they're not. It would raise, other troubling questions about, I don't know, immigration policy, say, or even sexual slavery. Let's move on to Canada, which of course is an exceedingly white supremacist country, where a man called Jagmeet Singh, who looks like a cartoon villain, is the leader of the New Democratic Party and regularly lectures Canadians on their wickedness. This is from Christopher Reynolds at the Canadian Press. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he does not agree with accusations that Quebecers are racist after one of his MPs applauded controversial remarks on the subject by a University of Ottawa professor. Nonetheless, Singh said NDP lawmaker Matthew Green, who is Black, has the right to express himself as a racialized Canadian. Who racialized him? Before he or his father came to Canada, this person was of no race, and then we stuck a label on him, or we implanted something into his genetic code? What? Every province and territory continues to struggle with systemic racism. A racialized MP who has had experiences in his life and who fights against systemic racism has the right to speak. What about those who are not racialized, or who just, whose people happen to come here for, for generations? Do we have the right to speak? No, we do not. Jagmeet Singh continues, I'm absolutely not in agreement with the idea that Quebecers are racist, but white supremacy exists across the country. Well, if it exists across the country, it exists in Quebec, and by your own logic, then that must mean that Quebecois are racist. In a Twitter post Monday evening, Green gave kudos to law professor Amir Attaran for standing his ground against the racism he sees perpetuated in Quebec. Attaran has claimed on social media that Quebec is led by, quote, a white supremacist government, unquote, and resembles an, quote, Alabama of the North, unquote. Why do we keep bringing so many people into my country that hate our guts? That think Canada is rotten and has always been rotten? Who want to destroy the place? Why do we keep doing that? I think that we can only describe this as a death wish. Yeah, I'm going to go briefly to the chat here. It ain't over until the jug meat sings, says Visionary Companion. When it does, it is the end times. Yes, as I've mentioned before, although evidence of this has been eviscerated from Wikipedia, Jagmeet Singh used to be called Jimmy Dalwal, but then changed his name because it apparently wasn't Sikh enough. When he was a MPP in the province of Ontario, he pushed a motion, which I think the Ontario government may have adopted, that the government of India was guilty of genocide of the Sikhs in the Punjab, which Singh very desperately wants to become an independent state called Khalistan. Brandon Smith says, no one is allowed to challenge the state's monopoly on the application of violence, not even to defend yourself. How about we have the ability to protect ourselves and not rely on the state, says Bob Paxson. The Georgia shooter had misogyny. Oh, yes. Apparently he was having a hard day. That's not what he said, and the media got that completely wrong. But, you know, are you surprised? Are you surprised? GC Style says Omar is right. Her opinions changed when race is revealed. Joe Schmo says, under the U.S. Census definition and U.S. federal agency, individuals' ancestry define white as original peoples of Europe, North Africa, or the Middle East. Matty E says, boomer music is ordure. Give me dubstep techno and hardcore gangster rap. Chogokin666 says, if the criterion for a mass shooting is 4 bodies, then POC are vastly overrepresented. You know, when Obama says things like the thing he said in that pompous message, he's not going to mention that the people who are in most danger of being shot to death are Black people living in what is called the inner city. He wouldn't dare say that. Or, oh, Black people shooting each other over trifles, real or imagined, that's the fault of white supremacy too. I suppose it is. Okay. There was a native Indian shot to death in 2016. His name was Colton Bushi. And he was shot to death by the owner of a farm in Saskatchewan called Gerald Stanley, who was tried for second-degree murder and manslaughter, but was acquitted 2 years later. There was a report on this, and apparently there were deficiencies in the RCMP handling of this. Let's read what happened. Bushi was a resident of the Cree Red Pheasant First Nation. After getting a flat tire, he and 4 friends drove to a farmhouse near Biggar, Saskatchewan, owned by Stanley. This is from Wikipedia. They had been drinking and had earlier tried to break into a truck at another farm. One of the group tried to start an ATV on the property while Stanley and his son were outside. Stanley's son ran to the vehicle and used a hammer to smash the windshield. The people in the SUV attempted to take off and crashed their vehicle into one of Stanley's cars. Stanley reacted by going into his home, returning with an old handgun, and firing 2 shots into the air. 2 of the individuals in the SUV fled on foot while Bushi moved to the front seat. Stanley then approached the SUV with Bushi in the driver's seat when the gun discharged. Bushi was shot in the neck just below the ear and died instantly. Stanley's defense claimed the shot was an accident and the gun's trigger was not pulled. Instead, the defense argued a 3rd round loaded into the magazine was fired, yet failed to detonate, precipitating a hang fire. The verdict was denounced by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, because that's the sort of thing that prime ministers do, and the then Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould. who's Native Indian royalty in British Columbia. She denounced it as well. The mayor of Saskatoon, Charlie Clark, said the trial and its aftermath represented a defining moment for this community and this country. Okay, so a gang of 5 drunken young men stage a prolonged raid on an isolated farmhouse. Did they think that this story was going to have a happy ending? And what Wikipedia is not going to tell you, and what the media has not said about this case from the beginning, that people in the area around Bigger, Saskatchewan had been terrorized by this young man and his posse for months. No, they don't want to tell you that. I don't know. Allergic to the truth, the media is that, oh, this beautiful young man, yeah. Okay, the fellow called Blake Desjardins, described as NDP candidate for Edmonton Griesbach in Alberta. If elected, I'd be Alberta's first Métis MP. Hooray! He's a very unique-looking individual, rather highly stylized in his appearance. I won't say more about that. I was looking at his Twitter feed today, and it's suffering. It's about suffering, not his suffering, I don't think. He retweeted something from D. Bizzo, the way that party leaders refuse to acknowledge that they have inherited the colonial spoils of a stolen land built on the violent destruction of our ancestors is violence against our relations. The genocide against us is ongoing. Admit the truth, Erin O'Toole, who's the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Oh, Indian numbers of Indians and their percentage of the population keeps increasing in Canada, which is a funny kind of genocide, I would say. He tweeted, that is Blake Desjardins, March 23rd, our ancestors suffered through forced starvation, public hangings, and war. My grandmother went to residential school. My birth mother died from the effects of the 60s scoop, the land taken. It's genocide. This is simply unacceptable. Erin O'Toole, shame on the Conservative Party of Canada. These are a bunch of claims that he's made, which may or may not be true. As I mentioned before, the 60s scoop refers to nice white liberals, and even people like Ted Byfield, the founder of the Report magazines, taking in Indian children who had pretty much, fully or mostly been abandoned by their parents. Apparently, this is now considered the height of wickedness, and all the so-called survivors of the 60s scoop are to be awarded $25,000. Okay, so Desjardins is not a status Indian. He is Métis. And what does that mean? It's pretty amorphous. But vote for me because my ancestors suffered. That is the state of politics in Canada. Oh, and Desjardins retweeted something from Dr. Muna Salah, described as assistant professor, curriculum studies, and Muslim motherhood researcher, social studies educator, great mom jokes, pronouns she, her, and what is this? Is Palestinian? Oh, yeah, it's a Palestinian flag. I understand the need to be supportive, but please don't DM me asking me what you can do re-attacks on Muslim women. I've gotten several DMs since last night, and it's contributing to more exhaustion. Think of how you advocate for other things you care deeply about and do that. Yes, emotional labor. Too much emotional labor is demanded from Muslim women. It's got to stop. It's just got to stop. And I think stopping that starts with every one of us. Here's a hilarious story from Global News. Canada slaps sanctions on Russian officials amid deteriorating human rights situation. This is following all of the tremendous sanctions we slapped on the People's Republic of China. Oh, we didn't? we didn't do that because we need their cheap tat at Walmart. Yes, this is all relating to the treatment of vocal Russian government critic Alexei Navalny. In a statement released Wednesday, Global Affairs said the new sanctions are aimed at highlighting the shrinking space for civil society and independent voices in Russia. And I don't know whether to laugh out loud or to grind my teeth. The shrinking space for civil society and independent voices in Russia. You mean you're comparing it to Canada? Will we ban gatherings? That Canada? The Canada where no independent thought is allowed in the media? None? Zero? That, when someone like Andrew Coyne counts as a right-winger in my country, that gives you an idea of just how shrunken the space for independent voices is in my country. But there's nothing that Canadians, particularly official Canadians, love more than being sanctimonious and lecturing the world. Now, these same people are talking about Canada as a hotbed of white supremacism and systemic racism. And of course, China has figured out, what to do with this. Don't lecture us about human rights, because by your own admission, your country is a hellhole. Too funny. I see that Ben Shapiro, the master of facts and logic, has made the case for mandatory vaccinations. This is from Tom Pappert at National File. During the March 18th episode of his radio show, conservative commentator Ben Shapiro made the case for mandatory vaccination. Conservative commentator. You're probably sick to death of this, but kids, don't call yourself conservatives. Don't let these people have any influence on your thinking or your actions or political choices. When a caller asked Shapiro about the use of fetal baby DNA and about vaccine companies not having any liability and having access to a special government-sponsored payout system for those who sustain critical injuries or die because of vaccines, Shapiro made the case for mandating them anyway. Shapiro claimed that personal liberty only counts when it comes to vaccines if the vaccine is simply designed to protect you from a disease and not to achieve herd immunity. Once you have to determine that there are differences, in my opinion, with regard to vaccines that are directly designed to prevent you from getting a disease and ones that rely on herd immunity in order to prevent others from getting a disease. So no, apparently informed consent is not necessary in medical experimentation, which, if I recall correctly, according to the Nuremberg trials, is a war crime. I mentioned the Irish Independent earlier. Sean O'Grady writes, the no job for care workers is a start, but the government needs to go even further. If trials proved they were safe, I would vaccinate every child old enough to receive it, even as a condition of receiving a state education. As a condition of receiving state education. He begins, I don't have any close relatives living in a care home, but if I did, I'm not sure how I'd feel if I knew the significant proportion, maybe even a majority of the workers in that home hadn't been vaccinated for COVID. We might end up in one. It is hardly comforting to think that a casual sneeze by one of the staff in the day room, or even a raised voice, could amount to a death sentence. It does, though, in the age of COVID. It seems entirely reasonable then for the government to insist that those applying for jobs in care homes should have to be vaccinated as a condition of employment. Indeed, the move is way overdue, and it isn't that much use for very long until it is made a statutory requirement for the vaccine to be periodically boosted to cope with new, more vicious corona variants as they emerge. Vicious means redolent of vice. It doesn't mean nasty or unpleasant. Viruses are not sentient. They have no agency. Therefore, they cannot be vicious by definition. Yes, it needs to be airtight. Yes, a new law should explicitly abrogate any existing employment law, so dismissal would always be helpful. It needs to be watertight. Granny deserves nothing less. Well, I'm thinking that Sean O'Grady's granny, if he has one, he seems to be a 50-ish fellow, or perhaps his mother, is probably less afraid of COVID-19 than he appears to be. Indeed, I would go even further if trials proved they were safe. Yes, vaccinate every child. The weakening in the uptake of the once universal MMR vaccine has led to the UK losing its World Health Organization measles-free status. Yes, but does this go far enough? Shouldn't children be vaccinated in utero? I think that until that is mandated, then we cannot relax. The price of panic is eternal vigilance. Of course, it's not all doom and gloom, the lockdowns and the social distancing and all the rest of it. There are some, there's some silver lining in the clouds, in the dark clouds. Here's a story from, again, the Irish Independent. 6 face mask chains will help you stay safe in style. Face mask chains are the new practical accessory that will prevent you from losing your covering. Here are our favorite styles from Mango, New Look, and, well, others. Yes, and I commented, slavery has never been so stylish. This is a story from the London Telegraph. Just give me a second here. It's, I suppose, could be seen as a riposte to the previous op-ed. This is from Ross Clark. Britain's creeping authoritarianism no longer bears any relation to the risk of COVID. It is impossible to justify continuing emergency powers when deaths are falling and the evidence on vaccines keeps getting better. A year ago, he begins, we had no idea that a disease imported from China would prove to be so virulent. It is called authoritarianism, and it has ravaged the government, parliament, and public agencies, leaving its victims unable to think beyond what to ban next, what to close down, what to cancel. The 7-day average of COVID deaths has fallen another 40% of the past week, and overall deaths now lie below the 5-year average. More than half the UK population, the most vulnerable half, has been inoculated, many with a vaccine that, according to the results of US trials announced yesterday, reduces the risk of serious illness by 100%. And yet, COVID rules are just about to get nastier. Draft laws published today and to be voted on Thursday not only extend emergency COVID legislation for another 6 months, 3 months beyond the end of the Prime Minister's roadmap for ending restrictions, they introduce a new offense of traveling to a port or airport with the intention of leaving the country without reasonable excuse, punishable by a £5,000 fine. In January, Vaccinations Minister Nadhim Zawari appeared to rule out compulsory vaccination, saying it is not the way we do things in Britain. Now, the Prime Minister and Health Secretary proposed to make it a legal requirement for care workers to be vaccinated. It is reasonable enough for employers to demand that staff are vaccinated as a condition of employment where it is justified, but a blanket national regulation looks very much like the foundation for a law demanding that everyone submits to the needle. Why? Over 90% of target groups have so far taken up the vaccine without any degree of compulsion, more than enough to reach herd immunity level if repeated through the age groups. Once the government justified its draconian restrictions on freedom by pointing at rising infection rates and the potential for overflowing hospitals. Now it does by speculating about the possibility of a third wave spreading across the channel when the wave was created by the Kent variant and surely traveled in the opposite direction. And speaking of the potential for grim new mutant forms of the virus beyond those which currently exist. Worst of all is the way that the ever more draconian COVID laws seem to excuse a wealthy elite. The new law banning international travel would provide an exemption for people traveling abroad to prepare a second home for sale or rent. In other words, the wealthy will be allowed a loophole to go to their villas, while the rest of us are forced to stay at home under pain of huge fines. societies rarely lose their freedoms in one go. A more common route to authoritarianism is through steady erosion of freedoms, each step seemingly justified by some external threat. That is the process we have been going through for the past 12 months. And Russ Clark concludes, we're like the proverbial frogs who sit still in a pot and get boiled alive. As the temperature is increased gradually, we seem unaware of what is happening. What's happening in the province of Ontario is that it's announced a $33.1 billion deficit for 2021 and said it's likely the province will not have a balanced budget until 2029-30. It's amusing to me when governments make statements like this. They have no idea what economic conditions are going to be like in 2029-30. None whatsoever. Martians could have landed by that time. Bill Gates could have blocked out the sun, which I'm not a scientist, but I think that this would have a deleterious effect on economic output. If anyone, can correct me there, I'd appreciate it. But it's no, it's not over. Oh, apparently another wave is coming to Ontario, and another wave is coming to Alberta. Alberta's Dr. Dina Hinshaw isn't ruling out increasing restrictions in the province. One more and more gets the feeling that this is permanent, that we will be expected to stay 2 meters or 6 feet away from each other forever, that we will be expected to wear masks forever, that we will be expected to be vaccinated every year or perhaps twice a year. One can't be too safe, right? Remember the precautionary principle. This is Tim Stickings from the Daily Mail. Sweden saw lower incidence in deaths during 2020 than most of Europe, despite shunning COVID-19 lockdown. Sweden has been in the spotlight after holding out against stay-at-home orders. The country's 7.7% excess in deaths was lower than Spain, 18%, or Belgium, 16%. But it fared worse than its Nordic neighbors, with Norway having no excess at all. I think that demographics definitely has a lot to do with this. I've yet to see any kind of studies on the effect of demographics on COVID death rates. Gerard Depardieu says they think people were complaining about wearing it for 15 minutes in the grocery store, which reminds me of something. It is a rainy day. It was earlier very windy. It gets quite windy in Victoria rather often because we are at the very tip of the Saanich Peninsula and thus surrounded by water on 3 sides. Well, despite it being very windy, and despite it being outdoors with the enormous atmosphere above and all around us, about half the people I saw on the streets in downtown Victoria today were wearing masks. Hickman Warrior says Russian media is freer in most areas except the person of Vladimir Vladimirovich. Yeah. I don't particularly have a problem with that. I don't really have any control over who runs my country. And I don't want to say things that are forbidden. But, the anarchists say if voting could change anything, it would be forbidden. And I think that there is some truth in that. Donald Trump gets elected president in 2016. Oh, my God, it's a stolen election. Putin stole it. Trump is his puppet. And he's not really the president. And he has to be evicted by any means necessary. If I lived in a regime where, okay, you have some authoritarian or semi-authoritarian strongman, but ordinary life is pretty much left alone to an extent that it is not in the West, I would definitely prefer that to what we have now. Roulette Cracked says, we've just been put under quarantine again. Not a happy camper. It was trying to ignore it, but it will not ignore you. This is a farce. There are no sensible headlines anymore. COVID couture, says Dan. Jeffrey Pye says, they will have to come through me to stick that crap in my kids. Gerard Depardieu says, Kevin, we learned a long time ago that COVID is indeed sentient and is also woke. Cecil Henry says, notice how the whole focus is on vaccination and not on the reality that COVID is not dangerous to most people and has already passed its peak. Selective focus accomplishes a lot if you let them. No right-wingers ever gone on MSN in Canada. That's the whole agenda. Yes, right-wingers in Canada, there are a couple of exceptions, but basically they stick to, wow, so much red tape with government. And why don't we have more free trade? Oh, and free trade between provinces. And boy, immigration sure is great, isn't it? Besides the economic benefits, of which there are none, there's also the diversity, and we love diversity. They're completely useless. Completely useless. And people complain, Andrew Coyne complained in the Globe and Mail today, that there doesn't seem to be any intellectual rigor coming from the Conservative Party of Canada. Well, Andrew Coyne has been playing this game for decades, and anytime a party, a supposedly right-wing party in Canada, gives indications that it might, stray off the reservation, Andrew Coyne declares this will not stand. It's kabuki theater. That's all that it is. Okay, let's get back to it here. I'll just wrap up today's COVID-19 horror. From Lockdown Skeptics, as a scientist, the most striking moment was when Whitty and Valence stood in front of a graph they knew to be wrong. Yeah. This was done in order to justify going into a second lockdown. This was the point they lost any shred of credibility. The real tragedy is the result of assumed effectiveness of lockdowns. Government thinking has never moved on, and we have learned nothing. What is there to learn when you already have the best solution to the problem? This is from an essay written by a senior research scientist for a pharmaceutical company. He has not disclosed his name, and you can guess why. The dictionary definition of a disease is, he continues, a disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or plant, especially one that produces specific symptoms or that affects a specific location and is not simply a direct result of physical injury. To have a disease is to be ill, yet the most striking feature of COVID-19 is that apparently 1 in 3 people can have this disease, but be perfectly healthy, or to use the new vernacular, asymptomatic. Perhaps most of us also have an asymptomatic broken leg, too. I first trotted this metaphor out a year ago, and I'm going to trot it out again. About half of Americans have the pneumonia virus resident in their body, but no one seems to be panicking about that. Epstein-Barr virus, which causes mononucleosis, that is a fact, and is alleged to cause an imaginary disease called chronic fatigue syndrome. 95% of adult Americans have the Epstein-Barr virus in their bodies. So all it would take would be for the experts to declare Epstein-Barr to be a deadly threat, and then we could say that all deaths could be attributed, or 95% of deaths could literally be attributed to the Epstein-Barr virus. Pubs can demand proof of COVID vaccination, says Boris Johnson. Yeah, see the famous libertarian, such a ferocious right-winger, all in favor of liberty and freedom and all that good stuff. But his new line is, if you don't want the government to control every aspect of your quotidian lives, then that makes you some sort of libertarian madman. The government's call for evidence to its COVID status certification review is open for another 5 days until March 29th. Anyone can respond as an individual, and although a cynic might suspect that the review is a piece of theater designed to confer legitimacy on a foregone conclusion, a healthy quantity of negative responses from the public would be no bad thing. A new study has laid bare the devastating impact of the lockdowns on the British high street. Over 11,000 outlets closed permanently in 2020, and the local data company expects that this will be followed by 18,000 more closures in 2021. Well, who needs high streets anyway? You can buy everything from Amazon, right? There's never any need to leave the house or commune with one's neighbors. That's dangerous. And okay, let's then finally, urgent lung cancer referrals fall by a third. So when all these people start dying of cancer and heart disease and strokes, this is all going to be attributed to COVID as well, I suppose. So they continue to claim spectacular figures for 2021 and 2022, and God knows how long into the future. And finally, before we leave this accursed topic, I'm going to take a look in at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. A flash poll: when did you stop listening? And the choices are Biden, July 4th picnics, CDC double masks, media Thanksgiving spike, or way before that. Interesting, the mostly peaceful protests seems to have been the turning point for a lot of folks. Okay, what else do we have here? Speaking of nursing home deaths, the Oregonian has a good piece on post-vaccine outbreaks in homes in that state, including the death of a fully vaccinated resident, other deaths post-first dose, and a home that avoided outbreaks until vaccinations began. By my count, Berenson writes, the number of U.S. mainstream media outlets that have done any serious reporting on the vaccines now stands at 2, the New York Times and the Washington Post. And he says, nah, I'm funning you. Actually, the only 2 are the Oregonian and KUTV2 News. So we are now going to move on. Oh, no, this is just too good. I can't ignore this before we get to James Burnham. Prince Harry, he's just, you may have thought him, a lout, a ginger-haired waster, but apparently he's a man of Stakhanovite energy and discipline. He's now the chief impact officer at some company that does God knows what that you've never heard of until 2 days ago. And now, according to Humpty, that is to say Brian Stelter at CNN Business, he has joined the venerable Aspen Institute's fight against misinformation. Voicing concern about an avalanche of misinformation in the digital world, Prince Harry is joining the Aspen Institute's new Commission on Information Disorder as a commissioner. I wonder if Prince Harry actually knows what digital means. Harry and 14 other commissioners and 3 co-chairs will conduct a 6-month study on the state of American misinformation and disinformation. Journalist Katie Couric, this is a very rigorous process here. Color of Change President Rashad Robinson and Chris Krebs, the former director of U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, are the co-chairs. The information crisis undermines confidence in our democratic institutions and strikes right at the foundation of society, Krebs said in a statement. That's what Aspen, a leading nonprofit, wants to examine. The Institute announced its Commission on Information Disorder in January with a mandate to develop actionable public-private responses. You know what that means. You can't say this, or people who say this will be punished. They will be made persons. I guess you had no idea that the Aspen Institute was such a powerful NGO, did you? Or you'd probably never even heard of it. According to Wikipedia, its international nonprofit organization, founded in 1949, is the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies. It's headquartered in Washington, D.C., and has campuses in Aspen, Colorado, near the shores of Chesapeake Bay, at the Wye River in Maryland, It has partner Aspen institutes in Berlin, Rome, Madrid, Paris, Lyon, Tokyo, New Delhi, Prague, Bucharest, Mexico City, and Kiev. Well. Its revenue in 2017 was $141 million. It was the creation of Walter Pipka, a Chicago businessman who had been inspired by the Great Books program of Mortimer Adler at the University of Chicago. You see how all of these institutions become corrupted? Mortimer Adler, a famous university professor, and the Great Books. You can find out about them. Adler went from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas to Catholicism. He believed in the propagation of knowledge. But now the Aspen Institute is all about shutting people up. And we're going to move on to James Burnham. Change and decay and all around I see, as I believe how the hymn goes. So we are talking about James Burnham's summing up of the state of the world as the Machiavellians see it. And this was around 1942 when he wrote this book. And he's talking about revolutionary preconditions. That's what I last talked about. The 5 pre-revolution conditions may readily be seen to hold for this private capitalist ruling class in the generation or more which has just concluded. The technological advance exceeding during the past 150 years what took place during all prior history, and the growth of elaborately subdivided mass industry made anachronistic both private capitalist enterprise and the political system of post-Renaissance nationalism. The private owners, dependent for existence upon a market economy, have shown themselves unable to handle integrated mass enterprise, the functional requirements of which are incompatible with a market economy. Similarly, the private owners are unable to organize either a world polity or the great regional states, which are the political minimum that is needed in order to permit contemporary social and economic life to continue operating. In addition, the private capitalists have proved unable to organize and control the mass labor movement, brought into being as the greatest new political, or rather social force by the structural changes in the modern economy. Leadership over this force has already gone into other hands. Now, this is in the context, I should explain, where he's summing up the argument that he made in his very influential book, The Managerial Revolution. That is to say, that private businesses had become so large and so complicated, so scaled, if you will, that their owners were no longer competent to run them, or they simply didn't have interest in running them because it would be too complicated. Burnham continued, and so this resulted in the birth of a managerial class, which is not tied to these businesses as you know, as families were. Managerial class is not tied to any particular business. It's not tied to any branch of business. You know, one could be a manager in a company which manufactures shoes one day, or in one that manufactures steel the next. I mean, John Scully went from Pepsi Cola to Apple. Burnham continues, during the last generation in this country and some decades earlier in Europe, many members of the capitalist ruling class, particularly from its highest strata, have largely given up active political and economic life in favor of the pursuit of pleasure or of culture. Toward the end of the last century in Europe, and since the First World War in this country, admission to the capitalist ruling class became much more difficult for new aspirants. The top rank of the ruling class became almost completely closed. This development was especially significant because during the greater part of the 19th century, class circulation was more rapid and extensive than in any previous social era except for revolutionary crises. The difference is plainly seen in the changed attitude of the youth. Young ambitions were no longer directed toward the goal of becoming a great capitalist, but more and more toward such outlets as a high place in the labor movement or in government. Equally noteworthy has been the loss of confidence by the capitalist elite in its own right to rule and in the formulas which upheld its rule, as well as the decay of mass faith in the sustaining capitalist parliamentary myths. The self-confident myth of progress, so bright in the late 18th and throughout most of the 19th centuries, began to fade in Europe, before the end of the 19th century, today is scarcely even referred to, except to be exposed and refuted by pessimistic interpretations of the world history. Prominent children of the ruling class have taken up communism, socialism, and anti-capitalist versions of fascism. The results of the First World War produced a great wave of disillusionment, which engulfed especially the capitalists themselves. Both elite and masses have become susceptible in the highest degree to formulas that abandon those key terms, which, when they were written into the constitutions and declarations of the late 18th century, seemed like eternal and irrefutable truths. Well, obviously, we're back to a belief in progress. We're back to a belief in history having a purpose, which is perfection, social perfection, justice for all. It's difficult to know how long such illusions will last. I would have thought that this would have been busted up by the economic collapse of 2007 to 2008. But the powers that be, they're very entranced with the idea of infinite progress. As far as the ability of the capitalists to run the world, well, of course, the big companies are run by managerial elites who are largely interchangeable. And as I've argued previously and for some time, they have entered into an alliance, a coalition with government. That is to say, businesses used to be right-wing. They used to believe in people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, that sort of thing. Now they are stridently left-wing, which would seem to be an anomaly, but it's not, because there is a trade-off being made. Governments get industry, big business support for all the revolutionary social initiatives, such as trans rights. On the other hand, the government decides that, no, you don't have to pay taxes, like Amazon. And the fact that you break the law repeatedly, well, we'll slap you on the wrist with some fines. The fact that antitrust law has become a joke, well, why would you want to prevent mergers of companies which are going to become even more woke and even more powerful as a result? Back to Burnham. The unwillingness or inability to use force effectively was shown in the unprecedented growth of humanitarian sentiments and their attempted expression in all fields of social life. Reform instead of punishment was to solve the problem of domestic crime. And we're back to that again. Arbitration was to replace strikes and riots in settling internal class disputes. Well, the unions have been pretty much busted, except for public service unions. Imperialism was to be done away with. Well, imperialism is back in a big way, but I believe it's called the responsibility to protect. In other words, we bomb you because we love you. War was to be abolished by a League of Nations and recorded signatures on a Kellogg Pact. Such ideas carried to such extremes were in their own way merely reflecting the inability of the old elite to face any longer the facts of social life. Thus, as always under analogous circumstances, a social revolution takes place. In order to remove these conditions, to solve at least sufficiently the problems out of which they grow, there occurs a drastic renewal and reorganization of the ruling class. Moreover, the general character of the new elite, though not as specific personnel, becomes clear simply through the analysis of the preconditions of the revolution. The new or renewed elite, as we have seen, the old elite is never wholly wiped out, must include men who are able to control contemporary mass industry, the mass labor force, and a supranational form of political organization. This means, in place of private owners skilled in the manipulation of financial profits or losses on the market, and of the old sort of parliamentary politician, those whom I call managers, the production executives and organizers of the industrial process, officials trained in the manipulation of the great labor organizations, and the administrators, bureau chiefs, and commissars developed in the executive branch of the unlimited modern state machines. And that the managers may function, the economic and political structure must be modified, and it is now being modified so as to rest no longer on private ownership and small-scale nationalist sovereignty, but primarily upon state control of the economy and continental or vast regional world political organization. The renewed elite will not only incorporate a large percentage of fresh elements with a greater self-confidence and faith in the myths of a new order, but will permit, at least for a while, and it too, under the pressure of the aristocratic tendency, begins to harden, a readier entry into its own ranks. We may be sure that the soldiers, the men of force, the lions, will be much more prominent among the new rulers than in the ruling class of the past century. Well, things are not looking very well for the lions and have not for quite some time. The foxes have all the power now. A few changes to be brought by the revolution will be more striking than this for the United States, and few are being more stubbornly disregarded. Up to the present, soldiers have had a lesser place in the social life of this country than probably in the case of any other great nation in history. Compared to religion, agriculture, commerce, industry, labor, finance, the army has been a social force of almost trivial influence. The men with virtue, the ruler types, have seldom felt any attractive pull from the military field. It offered too small a scope to those who were serious about the struggle for power. Those days have ended. This time, the soldiers are here to stay, as they apparently are here to stay in Washington, D.C. Never again in our time or our children's will the armies dry up into a small puddle on the fringe of the social pond. The armed forces will henceforth be not merely quantitatively large. They will also become a major arena for the contests of the ambitious and powerful, will supply a considerable section of the ruling class of the future, as we have seen, and will exert a great, perhaps sometimes the decisive influence on the social equilibrium. In what direction internally will the weight of the army fall? Our columnists and editors, who can discover the fate of a country depending upon some minor escapade of a labor leader or a farm lobbyist, do not even seem to have asked themselves this mighty question. But some of the soldiers already are beginning to ask it. There is only one revolution now going on, and I will leave Burnham with that for now and return to him tomorrow. Oh, let's talk about polyamory. Did you know that polyamory is taking over? Do you know that everyone is going to be in thruples, or whatever the word is for groups of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Did you know that? The media is determined to tell us. And it's called, well, once again, it's called manufacturing consent, which is a term of the left, of course, Chomsky and Herman, but a very useful one. Let's see some other examples of how consent has been manufactured. Oh, in, let's say, the past 50 years. No-fault divorce. It is the cruelest thing in the world to be in a marriage that one no longer wants to be in. Is no-fault divorce going to be a disaster for couples who split up? Is it going to result in serial monogamy in marriage? Is it going to ruin the lives of tens of millions of children? No. None of those things are ever going to happen. People are going to be very responsible about divorce. We see it in homosexuality. Just leave the poor boys alone. You know, they have enough trouble in their lives. No. They don't have any ambitions. No, that's crazy talk. How about single parenthood? Oh, well, single parents should be hailed as heroes. Hailed as heroes. They're better than, married people because of, their struggle. And no, this again isn't going to have deleterious effects on the women themselves or on their children. Besides, who cares about children anyway? We saw this with the trans movement most recently, and it just never stops. This is from Penny Starr at Breitbart. The Massachusetts city of Cambridge has put in place a measure that recognizes domestic partnerships of more than two people, euphemistically referred to as polyamorous families, which in practice means sexual relationships between multiple adults in one household. The Christian Post reported on the radical social construct A domestic partnership in the city that is home to Harvard University is now defined as the entity formed by two or more persons who are not related and consider themselves to be a family. They must file a registration stating that they are in a relationship of mutual support, caring, and commitment, and intend to remain in such a relationship. The revised policy removes the requirement that everyone in the partnership must live together and also scraps a section that makes domestic partners submit proof of their familial relationship to the city. The recently formed Polyamory Legal Advocacy Coalition, which gave input concerning the change in Cambridge, said in a statement that they hoped that it will be a wave of legal recognition for polyamorous families and relationships in 2021. Reaction to the development came swiftly and soundly as it allegedly signals further destruction of the traditional family bound by natural law that began with the acceptance of same-sex marriage. Polygamy was foreseeable because the arguments in support of same-sex marriage always had broader implications, says Joseph Backholm of the Family Research Council, who continued, those fighting to redefine marriage refused to discuss those implications because they were more concerned with getting what they wanted. Those who were concerned about the long-term implications of same-sex marriage were called bigots and fearmongers. Now, it turns out they were simply correct. AFA predicted this decades ago, said Ed Vitaliano, Executive Vice President of the American Family Association. Once you reject the biblical model for human sexuality, marriage, and family, when it comes to homosexuality, there is no logical stopping place. Polygamy and polyamory are acceptable, Vitaliano said in the statement. This return to pagan sexuality began with a rejection of God and his word. Unfortunately for the people of Massachusetts, and eventually the people of this nation, paganism leads to barbarism. And I'm looking at a picture here, three dads in a baby. Well, there's a baby, a newborn baby, and there is a man resting in a hospital bed. Well, he didn't give birth to that. These appear to be three homosexual men. Why they're acting out this burlesque of giving birth in a hospital room, where did they get these children from? Is there a service that provides them to homosexual men? But from the influential New Yorker, Annals of Domestic Life, how polyamorous and polygamous are challenging family norms. Transgressive, as we know, transgression is always a good thing. Alina, Vicky, Joe, and Valerie Darger near their home in Harriman, Utah. Joe says that getting bigamy decriminalized in the state involved a three-prong approach: legislative, legal, and public relations. From opposite sides of the culture, parallel campaigns for legal recognition may soon make multiple partner marriages as unremarkable as same-sex marriages. This is by Andrew Solomon. 15 years ago, when Rich Austin was in his early 40s, he and his wife watched the HBO show Big Love about a polygamous family of fundamentalist Mormons in Utah. I kind of got hooked on it, Rich told me. I had a string of broken relationships, so I was joking, well, maybe if I was a polygamist, I wouldn't have that problem. He had a daughter from a fling a few years earlier, whom the couple were raising together. They were swingers, but Rich wanted more than unattached sex and broached the subject of polygamy with his wife. The marriage soon broke up. In 2008, Rich met Angela Hinckley and soon told her how much he liked the show. Because that you want to base your life, particularly the most important and intimate aspects of it, on an HBO show. Because, you know, that's what normal people do. Polyamory. Have you ever noticed how weird and mostly ugly almost all of the people involved in polyamory are? It seems to me to be the timeshare of relationships. That, let's say, you know, you want a vacation in South Carolina, right? But you don't have enough money, you know, to buy a vacation home in South Carolina, in Myrtle Beach or whatever. You do have enough money to rent the place for a month, because that's all you need, because, you know, your connection to South Carolina is not that strong. And those polyamorous is the same. Yeah, I don't care enough about you, you know, to have a marriage with you or even a singular relationship. No, you're not enough for me. I need someone else, or someone else. And more than that, I need all your approval of what I'm doing and my approval of yours and all the rest of it. So we don't feel like weirdos. We don't feel social ostracism. Yeah, okay. At the family's largest, Rich had 4 wives, but when I met him a couple of years ago, he and Angela were divorcing, and another woman, April, had come and gone. Yeah. I talked about serial monogamy, and marriage has become, for many people in the West, a kind of serial monogamy. To have and to hold, all that, till death do us part. People still say that. I've seen ceremonies where people say that, but nobody means it anymore. But it's all good, right? People need to follow their bliss. Now, I remember a woman, social conservative in Canada, very prominent, who said that polygamy was going to follow the legalization of same-sex marriage in Canada, and she was shouted down. She was called a zealot and a lunatic, and how dare you? Well, according to the authoritative New Yorker, this is coming true. Oh, but yeah, let's just abandon. How long? I'm waiting for national reviews. The conservative case for polygamy and the conservative case for polyamory. This is from Henry Delacroix at the American Sun. A curious phenomenon has been noticed by those of us on the right is the childless Western leader trend. Biden is a figurehead, but Kamala, who takes the calls with foreign leaders, fits the barren mold. It's actually amazing to see it listed out, but should come as no surprise. This is the physical symbol of the elite of the EU and American left. When mapped out, the battle lines would require leaders that resemble the personal forms of the two sides. This also visually hints at why the Western elite will never pause immigration. Each terror attack, each article on Latin American caravans, and each border surge comes with more frustration at the elite doing nothing. This is not the case. This inaction, combined with enabling the replacement of natives, is what they want. We all know this. This is what the current regime wants and is old news. They want a mass of people will have peasant values, enjoy the higher material standards of living compared to their third world homelands, and never become a rising elite to challenge these current elites. See how this ties in with Burnham? We all know the game and we all worry about decay, yet our elite don't. Breaking it down further, the battle is truly the childless left-wing Europeans and Americans with their non-European allies fighting the right-wing Europeans or European Americans to control the economics, national resources, and areas. As these left-wing whites are not procreating, they are really fighting their genetic cousins to kill them off and hand over control to alien creatures. That is it. Childless whites allying with non-whites to kill off procreating whites so that the non-whites control America and Europe. It makes perfect sense that all these Western leaders would be childless. It is the perfect symbol. It is as close to suicide as they can perform because they are cowards. Beyond that, this is also the system selecting for the most dedicated to the system's goals. What greater dedication can one make to destroying native European and American cultures than to not have children in one's personal life? These leaders are not making the decision to go childless now. They made the decision decades ago when it was still a bit different. Maybe not in Germany, where the total fertility rate has been below Japan's since the mid-1980s. This is a differentiator for the individuals sliding up the greased poles of politics when roughly any polished speaker can do their job. What type of marker does one need? I'm dedicated. Look at how many times I work for the party. Hell, I even sacrificed a family to fight for the party. It's not just about the system, but a reflection of the culture themselves. Let us all be honest about the Clintons left to their own devices. Without the need to have a kid to run for office, they would have been single and childless forever. Obama might have been gay or found a white or mixed woman to marry. They felt the need to marry correctly and have kids because the electorate expected it from them. There is a natural revulsion or suspicion by many to childless women, men or women seeking power in America, so we still require our politicians to do so. Progressive politicians no longer suffer that same burden. Their population now is enough of a critical mass that will not procreate or carry on Therefore, politicians need not worry. This hints at the lack of concern. These leaders have no shared concern for what may come from importing the third world. Why should they worry? They'll be dead in 20 to 30 years and leave no one behind to suffer in case the grand replacement project yields an apocalyptic war zone in their homelands. The decadence and hedonism of today is the focus. The individual has priority, and individually they will be cut down. Again, excellent essay from Henry Delacroix at theamericansun.com. Yes, mass third world immigration and abortion, and now euthanasia. This is from Jonathan Van Maren at lifesitenews.com. Back in 2019, LifeSite News reported on data indicating that Spain was experiencing what some call a demographic suicide. According to statistics, during the first 6 months of the year, 215,478 citizens died, while only 170,074 were born. During the same rate, Spain had an abortion rate of 11.53 per 1,000 women. It was the lowest birth rate in 80 years. A death rate higher than the birth rate was not only demographic decline, it was a death spiral. In nation after nation, legalized abortion combined with the collective decision not to reproduce has resulted in aging populations. This, in turn, has placed enormous strain on the healthcare system, as an increasingly smaller pool of taxpayers funds a rapidly growing number of elderly people needing more care. And of course, the solution is immigration. But as it turns out, in both Canada and the United States, the immigrants who are supposed to be paying for the old people take in far more in government benefits than they pay out. Combined with the fact that people are living longer, predictable crises have arisen in accessibility or presence of long-term care, palliative care, and the funds necessary to sustain a health system in nations where the population is not replacing itself. In response to this, Western nations have begun to legalize euthanasia and assisted suicide, beginning with the Netherlands. Canada, where the brutal and scandalous state of long-term care was exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic, the military had to be sent into homes to care for old men and women lying helpless in their own waste after being abandoned by their caretakers. Recently expanded government-funded and government-facilitated suicide to the mentally ill, and that includes depression, by the way. State broadcaster CBC had said the quiet part out loud during the 2015 debate on initial legalization, when it noted that the healthcare system would save an enormous amount of money from euthanasia. Body bags are cheaper than palliative beds. And of course, if these people are killed off, they don't get pensions anymore. Yes, and as I have noted, there's another aspect to this of culling the weak, and it's expensive. My government has decided to give free heroin and other drugs to people. And, I can hear them being hauled out in ambulances after they OD pretty much every day. We wouldn't want to help these people, to live decent lives. It's just easier and cheaper to kill them off. It's a rather brutal age that we have entered. But in happier news, women's soccer stars joined Biden to promote closing pay gap. And there's a picture of U.S. soccer women's national team member Megan Rapinoe, the amusingly named Megan Rapinoe, visits the White House briefing room. So we see what a canny operator Joe Biden is. First, with his declaration on sex changes in the military, and then the declaration that the U.S. military would pay for them, he has locked up the trans vote. And now he has locked up an even more valuable, crucial, one might say, electoral bloc, the lesbian vote. Just a political genius. Wednesday marked Equal Pay Day, which is how far into the year women must work on average to make up the pay disparity between what men and women earned the prior year. The Census Bureau estimates that a woman working full-time would earn about 82 cents for each dollar paid to a man. Yeah, this keeps being trotted out. Yeah, okay. So how much are these women working compared to men? Do they have unbroken careers, or do they take time off to have children and then raise them? It's been known for quite some time that for some years now, women in the United States who have college degrees earn more than men. And in fact, male wages in both Canada and the United States have been stagnant since the 1970s, while female wages have rocketed. Oh, the pay gap is real, Biden said. And this soccer team, is living proof that you can be the very best at what you do and still have to fight for equal pay. The women's team has won the World Cup 4 times, most recently in 2019, but it sued the U.S. Soccer Federation that same year over wage discrimination. The suit was dismissed in May because the women had accepted a different base pay structure than the men's soccer team. The women's team plans to appeal the dismissal. Despite those wins, I've been devalued. I've been disrespected and dismissed because I'm a woman, Rapinoe said. And I've been told that I don't deserve any more than this because I am a woman. Okay. So they're demanding as much money as the male team. Male soccer is a popular, very popular game around the world. Women's soccer is not. The only people who care about women's soccer are the women who play it and lesbians. Nobody else cares. So supposedly they are the best at what they do. Here is a story from CBSSports.com from April 2017. In preparation for 2 upcoming friendlies against Russia, the U.S. women's national team played the Football Club Dallas under-15 boys academy team on Sunday and lost 5-2. So the best in the world played a bunch of boys under the age of 15 and got routed. This friendly came as the U.S. looked to tune up before taking on Russia on Thursday night in a friendly. Of course, this match against the academy team was very informal and should not be a major cause for alarm. The U.S. surely wasn't going all out, with the main goal being to get some minutes on the pitch, build chemistry when it comes to moving the ball around, improve defensive shape, and get ready for Russia. Yeah, I'm really supposed to believe that the best there are, the national team, women's soccer team, of course, they're not going to try to beat a bunch of boys, not a national team, but a local team under the age of 15. If this was just, a tuning up match, well, why did they pick that team? They picked that team deliberately because they understand, even if they're not willing to admit it, that that's how well they play soccer. Less well than the level of a local team of under 15 boys. Oh, and from Truth or Fiction, was the U.S. women's national team defeated by teenage boys in a 2017 soccer match? Claim the U.S. WNT lost a game to a young teenage boys team. Rating decontextualized. You see, it's all about the context. If the best in the world get their asses whooped by, once again, a bunch of boys, not a national team, but a local team of under 15 boys, it's insignificant. It's absolutely insignificant. Let's have a final look at the chat. Visionary Companion says maybe a harem of good-looking, a not good-looking woman is the equivalent of one good-looking one. Brandon Smith says Harvard study shows women most happy when their spouse is miserable. Oh dear, I hope that's not true. Brandon Smith says our planet is being saved by benevolent forces from what's happening to it. Teddy Saginaw says, I've been told by very smart people that there's no difference between men and women. In fact, it's all social construction. Women can have penises, duh. So what pay gap? Good point. Ogan Zion says, improve women's soccer by letting trans women crowd out those man-hating idiots. Yeah, this is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. Just before just before the Supreme Court of Canada legalized gay marriage in Canada, I said, it's not all doom and gloom. Once again, silver lining in the cloud, Vesta la Juba, gay divorces. Yeah. And that's going to be it's already a lot of fun. Enron says, reminds me of the Saturday Night Live sketch in which Peyton Manning plays football against school kids. I saw that. That was very funny. These teenage boys were Peyton and the champion women were the kids. Tom Anderson says, Harvard is where striver class goes to surrender all critical thinking ability. Okay. Ogan's Iron, KMG, Quebec Superior Court was asked about masks for primary school kids. Court agreed masks could hurt kids more than help, but okay to mandate because any risk of transmission too much. Well, in typical years, except strangely not in winter 2019, fall and winter 2019 and 2020 and 21. Lots of people die from influenza, but at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, almost nobody. It's curious how that happens, but obviously it's a threat. So obviously there's a risk, high risk. Children get sick from the flu and they infect adults and vice versa. So I wonder where that is going. Mrs. Assad says, I really hate other people's children. I like what Jerry Seinfeld said about this. He said, I'm not interested in other people's children because I can make my own. Mrs. Assad said, I fussed at some little kids outside today, and the little turds called me a Karen after I left. Oh, dear. Jonathan Pohl says, who can afford more than one wife? Well, very few men can afford even one wife on the traditional model. De Berea says, politicians are smart enough to understand what the bureaucrats did to one side. They won't hesitate to do to the other. Previously from De Beres, historically, when the bureaucrats take over, they end up on the guillotine not long after politicians will unite against them, regardless of colors. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. I don't know, spiteful mutants. Oh, are we talking about COVID or polyamorous? From Guyana, a transgender boy man in Minnesota was just awarded $300,000 for having been banned from the boys' locker room. While someone like KMG lives in a hotel. No words left. Okay. Well, Dennis Prager says bisexuality is the norm amongst women. Again, Tina Fey, Liz Lemon said on Saturday Night Live that there's no such thing as bisexuality. It's just a term invented to sell jeans. And that's it for today. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be discussing Jean-Luc Godard's apocalyptic film from 1967, Weekend. And on April the 1st, for Holy Week, another French film from someone that Godard helped early in his career, Eric Romer, his Arthurian tale, Percival Le Gallois, on the book club. On this Friday, I'm going to be talking about Joel Kotkin's The Coming of Neo-Feudalism. Our society is being rapidly reduced to a feudal state, a process now being exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of small businesses are near extinction, millions more losing their jobs, and many others stuck in the status of a property-less serf. The big winners have been the expert class of the clerisy and most of all the tech oligarchs who benefit as people rely more on algorithms than human relationships. And on Music Monday, on March the 29th, I am going to be discussing the rise and fall of the producer, that is to say, the pop music producer. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Once again, I want to thank everyone who responded to my appeal for funds last Friday and managed to keep me where I am, and I'm ever so grateful for this. God bless you. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation can be made directly to the live stream via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I shall leave you with this benediction. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.